Hey, TikTok. I probably got about an hour, and I am back to talk about whatever it is people want to talk about, whether it be moral realism, or free will, or God, or just any topic in philosophy or psychology. That's fine. Big one for me lately has been the problem of evil. And, there's a more modest way of framing the problem of evil, which is that the existence of God runs into some challenges when you observe certain things in the world, like suffering, people doing bad things, basically anything that we would consider bad happening, raises some concerns. Maybe they're answerable. But one might expect, if there were a being that's all good, all knowing, and all powerful, that they would make sure that nothing bad ever happens. And yet we observe bad things happening. So then the question is, how is that possible? How do you account for that? So the more modest version would say the observation that there's suffering in the world is unexpected. It's surprising if this kind of God exists. And then there's a stronger version of the argument, which is to say that there's some sort of contradiction or inconsistency in the observation of suffering. There's also another way of framing it, which is that there can be gratuitous or too much suffering. Maybe the existence of God is consistent with some types of suffering. Maybe some types of suffering are necessary to achieve greater goods, or they're important for building us up. Developing courage, developing certain sorts of qualities requires a certain sort of degree of suffering. And all things being equal, it's actually good for some suffering to occur in order to obtain, a greater good in the long run. I don't find any of that very compelling. And the reason for that is I think that a lot of the considerations people have for why that might be necessary is too contingent on unnecessary facts about how people actually happen to be physically constituted, psychologically constituted. People might say, oh, you have to have the possibility of pain in order to appreciate what's good. Why? It doesn't seem like a logical requirement. And if that's a requirement because of the way our psychology happens to be, God could have just created us with a different psychology. And, people will give analogies. They'll say, okay, well, when you work out, you have to feel uncomfortable or suffer in order to build up muscle. Okay, but God could have created a world in which people just have muscle, or they don't need to suffer in order to acquire muscle. All of the suffering that's supposedly necessary for people to achieve some sort of good only strikes me as necessary, conditionally necessary. It's conditionally necessary given the sort of circumstances that we find ourselves in. It may be, conditionally necessary that you have to go have, really uncomfortable and unpleasant dental work done, but it didn't have to be the case that, problems accumulate, like dental problems accumulate. It could be that our mouths just naturally clean themselves, or never get, dirty in the first place, and that dental hygiene is completely superfluous. God could have created a world like that. One response is God couldn't have created a world like that. This is actually the best world that we're in. If this is the best world that there possibly could be, I'm not impressed. Anyway, so if you want to join, request and talk about any of these topics, I see someone in the comments, morality, subjective or objective. That's a big one for me. That's the biggest one that I talk about. So if you want to request and come up and talk about that, I am a moral anti-realist. I don't think that there are objective moral facts. The technical term that's become popular these days is stance-independent moral facts. That is, moral facts that are true independent of the goals, standards, or values of any individuals or any groups. They're made true by something other than our attitudes, our preferences, that sort of thing. So if you want to come up and talk about that, that would be great. That's pretty much my favorite topic, but I am trying to span out and talk about other topics too, so I'm willing to talk about religion. It's not really the main thing that I study. So a lot of you are probably people that have been here before, but oh no, just messed up my computer. One second, I got to fix my computer. I just knocked something over. Anyway, do request if you want to talk about any of this stuff. Don't see any requests yet. Another person I would recommend checking out is Danny from Phil Talk. And Danny is really great at covering issues in philosophy of religion, like the problem of evil, but also the Trinity and other issues. But I mostly focus on metaethics. All right, people, we gotta make this interesting. Someone's got a request. If not, I'm gonna have to go on some sort of epic rant. I don't know what I'm gonna epically rant about today. A big one that I have been really concerned with lately, and I don't know if it's going to resonate with people, so maybe people will just drop out of listening, is the current state of the academic publishing industry. That probably sounds super duper boring, and maybe someone can. Oh, I did get a request, so I don't have to bore you with that. I will talk about it sometime though, because I personally I think it's interesting. Maybe I see someone said convince Joe to come to TikTok. Which Joe are you talking about? Joe Schmid from Majesty of Reason.
Hello?
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you, Lance?
I am good. I am good. What you want to talk about?
Well, I've never talked to you before, but I was intrigued because, I've seen you talk to other people, and do you know who Shark is?
I do not. Who is Shark?
He's got like 1 million followers on here. He like does like debates and stuff, but he made like a tier list, and he put you at the very top of the tier list when it comes to debating. So I thought that was
Really?
interesting.
That is interesting. I don't think I would put myself at the top of a tier list. And part of the reason for that is, maybe in the past I would have put myself higher on the list, but one of the things that happened with me over time is that I have become increasingly disinclined to engage with people that I think are rude or aggressive or
Yeah.
in some cases not arguing in good faith. I used to get really fiery and angry and get all yelly in discussions, and I just don't want to be that kind of person anymore. And so when people I think are being uncooperative in a discussion, like they're just not being they're not out to get at the truth, they're out to like get gotchas and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
I just kind of lose interest in the discussion, and I often just shut down. Like I don't want to scream at them, so I'm just like I don't want to talk to this person. Oh my god.
Well, yeah, a lot of TikTok debates divulge into that, and it just becomes like trying to win or beat the other person rather than actually listening and having a conversation. So it's more of like a sport, rather than a discussion, which I agree with you, man. I don't prefer that. So maybe we can have a nice civil conversation about some of this stuff.
I hope so. I do really like that sort of meta discussion, but yeah, I wouldn't put myself at the top of that just because I don't think I have the temperament or the disposition to deal with people that are being difficult in
Mm,
conversations, and I think that there are some people that are like, in principle, I think I could competently hold someone's feet to the fire if I didn't lose my cool. And my
yeah.
concern is, I'm live right now. If I get angry, it's going to be a really embarrassing thing if I start going like, "You freaking idiot!" Rah! And like that's part of who I am is to be like that, and I just don't want to be that person. So I'm trying to cultivate a different temperament.
That's good. I like that. Well, I've got a couple of things I'm interested in talking to you about, but feel free to like cut me off or kick me anytime because I know you probably have other people who want to talk to you.
All right, I'm kicking you
But
now. No, I'm kidding. What do you want to talk about?
um, can we start with free will? What are
Sure.
your thoughts on free will?
So, my problem with free will is that it's often so underspecified what people are even talking about that when you ask them for specification, you often get either something that remains vague and underspecified. Oh, it's the ability to make choices, or it's the ability to act in a way where you could have done otherwise. And that's fine as a sort of initial first pass at a definition. There's nothing wrong with if you say, "Hey, what is that?" and then someone gives you like a one sentence definition. But when it comes to philosophy, like, merriam-webster.com is not going to be adequate for defining
Hmm.
justice or goodness or free will or any of these concepts. You're going to need to say more. And the problem that I found with free will consistently is that when I ask people to say more, I run into issues. And the issue is that it bottoms out in them saying something where I'm not even sure what they're saying makes any sense, like it might not even be meaningful, or it bottoms out in them saying something pretty trivial, like people make choices. So I don't believe in free will, but I do think people make like I'm making a choice to talk to you right now, like obviously making choices. If all
Hmm.
free will is the ability to make choices, then it seems like a pretty trivial thing. So,
Why does
it,
that seem trivial to you? I feel like that's a pretty important thing.
well, it seems trivial in the sense that I don't think that there's much in the way of a dispute about whether people, quote unquote, make choices. Where a choice, like what making choices, can be construed in ways that are consistent with rejecting pretty much everything in the academic literature about what free will is. So, like, you could be like determinism, for instance. If you think determinism is incompatible with free will, okay, well, if you think everything is determined, you could still just think people are determined to make one choice rather than another. So, as long as you're understanding choice to simply mean selecting one option from a set of two or more options, that seems consistent with pretty much any conception of free will, including like super skeptical stances.
Yeah, what about like, because I think I would kind of fall into that category. I'm a Christian. I don't have any like philosophical training or like education, so I'm still like learning about a lot of things. But when you're saying like I would hold that all of like there is only one way that everything will play out, and that way has already been determined. However, I think within that, people still make the choices. They're just determined to make certain choices. So like exactly what you described, I think I would hold to. But like I also have talked to people who say, well, actually, we don't have the ability to make choices. We're kind of just we're like we're in this chain of cause and effect that we have no control over, and my desires are what determine what I will do, and I have no control over them, kind of thing. Have you heard people that say that?
Oh, absolutely. But what will end up happening is if you ask those people what they mean by a choice, they might mean something like a decision that was not determined by antecedent causal factors outside of one's control. And if that's the case, then yeah, okay. I don't think people make choices of that kind, because I think personally, I'm inclined towards thinking that all of our choices are determined. That's my suspicion. Maybe there's randomness in the universe or something. And yet my conception of choice is consistent with determinism, and theirs isn't. And so what you have there is, okay, well, free will, people don't have free will because they don't make choices. Well, what is free will? Well, it's the ability to make decisions in a way that is not determined by antecedent causes. Okay, so they don't have the ability to make choices, where choices are just defined in pretty much the same way. So it's just a person just restating determinism over and over.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, again, it's like they're just stipulating their way to the conclusion that they want to get at.
So what is the difference between libertarian free will and what's the other option? I don't know.
Compatibilism.
Compatible. So is it that a libertarian free will would have like there's nothing that's influencing your decision at all? There's no like, because I don't know if I would say determining. Well, I guess you could say determining, but you're just kind of able to make any decision without like any like bias or influence. Is that what they mean by libertarian?
No, I don't think so. Proponents of libertarian free will are not going to say that we make decisions in a way that's necessarily unbiased or not influenced by anything. They're going to, in various ways, hold that our decision making is that some might say that it's exempted from certain sorts of deterministic forces. So they might just say, because typically you have this compatibilist incompatibilist divide in the free will debate, which concerns whether or not free will is possible if determinism is true. And so compatibilists will say we could have free will even if determinism is true. And then it's an open question whether or not determinism is true. Sometimes people construe compatibilism as determinism is true and we have free will.
What would
But it
be?
could be. Oh,
Sorry to
sorry.
interrupt you. Could you just give me an example of like what would be a determining force that could inhibit someone's free will?
Well, it depends on which account you're going with. So uh, compatibilists think that even if literally everything is determined, we could still have free will. So
Right, but like a libertarian free will, you said, is someone who believes that there's nothing determining our choices. So like, what would be something that like, according to what would they be looking for, that as like something that could determine our choices?
well, coercion might be a situation. So if someone points a weapon at you or threatens you and says, say that, speak this lie publicly, or I'm going to hurt your family or something, like they could say something wild like that. And then the person might do it. And in that case, the person is not making a decision that is a product of their own free will. They're coerced. So coercion would be one example. There are like weird science fiction examples. So imagine a scientist plants a chip in someone's brain and they like literally control their body like a puppet. person doesn't have free will under those circumstances. So libertarian conceptions of free will don't hold that like everybody always has free will in every situation. They certainly think that there are possible circumstances in which a person's free will is overridden.
Yeah, I think like when I hear naturalists talk or like people who don't believe in anything supernatural, like they say that our actions are like purely just determined by whatever biological or chemical composition of our brain and stuff like that. To me, that sounds like you are a puppet on the strings of your biology, and that you actually have no agency at all, but it's just you're controlled by whatever whims, or chemicals that your brain makes you do. Is that a fair critique, or what am I missing?
Yeah, so that's you get these common sorts of positions from some sorts of incompatibilist determinists who will argue that we don't have free will because everything about us is determined and caused. Often, one of the things that those accounts are focused on rejecting are libertarian conceptions of free will. And then the dispute might just pivot to is determinism true or not? That would be one pivot point that the argument could turn on. However, the argument could turn on what it would even mean for there to be some alternative to determinism. Is randomness sufficient for free will? Probably not. So, sometimes people will bring up things like quantum indeterminacy and they'll say, but the universe isn't determined because, if this or that particular, like the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is correct, then there are random events in the universe. And so actually everything isn't determined. There's some randomness. Well, is that going to give us free will? Probably not.
No, I don't
And
think
so you're going to need
randomness
something
can give us
else.
free will either.
Yeah. So, and neither do I. And I don't think most proponents of libertarian free will do either. So they're not typically going to appeal to randomness. And yet you will see that in sort of a like non-professional debates where people will point to that. Maybe some professionals point to that too. So yeah, this has been a sort of recurring theme in some sorts of, I guess you could say, scientifically minded critiques of what philosophers are up to. Robert Sapolsky is probably the most prominent recent proponent of this view. He has a book out called Determined, and he's been making the rounds on podcasts and YouTube channels, arguing against free will on this basis that, hey, we can actually look empirically at the long causal story that leads up to people making any particular decision. It could span back to the origin of the universe, but ultimately our decisions are a product of what our neurobiology is doing. And so if you can specify the precise interactions in the brain, like what the brain is doing at any given time, you would in principle be able to predict exactly what a person's going to do.
Do you
Maybe
agree
that's
with his
applicable in
assessment?
practice. Well, I do think that in principle, you could probably predict everything a person is going to do. I think you're going to run into a problem that in practice, there's all sorts of epistemic barriers that would make it infeasible to actually predict what anyone's going to do in any given circumstance with that degree of accuracy. But I do think it's possible in principle. Like if you had a Laplacian demon, or you had, in other words, if you had all the computational resources in the universe to predict what a person's going to do, I think you could predict it. So yeah, I'm inclined towards suspecting something like determinism is true. But then the question really turns on, okay, well, what are the implications of that? So that means we don't have free will? Well, what exactly is free will? I've been told, I haven't read Sapolsky's book, but someone I know that has read his book said that he doesn't really give an account of what free will is. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I also know that with psychological research that's been conducted on people's beliefs about free will, they don't typically give definitions. So it's pretty hard to get. Go for it.
If you were to make you're saying, like a hypothetical computer program that could assess like all of somebody's environmental factors, every moment and experience of their life up until this point, and it came out with this equation or whatever, and the conclusion was that they were going to choose chocolate ice cream instead of vanilla. Would the conclusion from that be that they have no ability to choose otherwise, or is it just that they won't choose otherwise?
This is kind of a frustrating way to respond, I imagine, but it's going to depend on what one means by the ability to do otherwise.
Okay.
So
Explain.
they're not going to do otherwise, but what exactly does the ability to do otherwise mean? Does it mean the ability to do otherwise given exactly the same conditions, or does it mean a capacity to do otherwise or like conditional on one having the desire to do so, or something like that? So for instance, do I have the ability to go out in my backyard and start like grabbing up clumps of dirt and eating them? Do I
Yeah.
have that ability? I mean, I'm not going to do it. And if you know everything about the causal story that has led me to be the kind of person I am, I'm not inclined to go in my backyard and eat dirt. So do I have the ability to do it? In other words, like if we had this supercomputer and it could predict what I'm going to do, it's going to tell you Lance is not going to go in his backyard and eat dirt. So do I have the ability to do it? It's really going to turn on what you mean by the
Are
ability.
you
Like
are you
there's
go ahead, finish what you're saying.
Oh, I just to yeah. So in one sense, like if by the ability to do so, it like requires that one will do so, then yeah, I don't have the ability. If by ability you mean something like, is it physically possible for me to do so, or practically feasible for me to do
Right.
so, provided I had a motivation to do so? Absolutely. If I really wanted to eat dirt in my backyard, I actually could. In contrast, if I really wanted to run faster than the speed of light, too bad. I can't do that. And
Yes,
so I have
yes.
the ability to eat dirt, but not the ability to run faster than the speed of light. And I think that's a more reasonable use of the term ability.
Yes, I agree. So I have you do you know much about like the New Testament or like the story of Jesus at all?
Not really. I grew up Christian, and I was actually some of the earliest books that I read. I say books. Some of the earliest reading I did was the Bible. So my
Yeah.
dad was a Sunday school teacher, and I read I think several versions of the Bible. But
Yeah.
it was so long ago. We're talking over 30 years ago,
Yeah,
so I don't
so
remember a lot of it.
well, you might know this story, but there's a time at the end of Jesus's ministry where he looks at his disciple Peter, and Peter says that he's willing to go to death with Christ, and he's like, "I will die for you, like I will, give up my life." And Jesus tells him, "Before the rooster crows, you will have denied me 3 times." And I've gotten questioned on this when I do lives, and they'll say, "Well, this proves that free will doesn't exist because Peter had no ability to do otherwise. If Jesus is really God or whatever, and he could tell the future, then Peter was kind of forced to do this." But I think like the way that you just explained it is a great way that I maybe could articulate it better. Is like, yes, he had the physical ability to do otherwise. Like, there's nothing stopping his mouth from confessing his belief in Christ or whatever. But did he have the will to do it, or without the will, could he have done that? I think that's a distinction that needs to be made. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I don't see that. I mean, I'm no Bible scholar, so take anything I say with a grain of salt. I don't know the proper way of contextualizing that passage in light of the rest of Christian doctrine and scripture and a couple thousand years of very thoughtful and intelligent people thinking about how to interpret this stuff.
Right.
But that like a one-off prediction doesn't strike me as saying nobody anywhere has any free will in any circumstance. That seems a little weird. Like, I could say,
Oh,
oh man,
yeah.
that person's totally going to go to that party. I know they
Well,
said they're going
I
to stay
think
home and study, but
yeah.
they're going to go. So
I
what if I
think it's
predict that?
it's yeah, it's really hard to draw like an overarching claim about the existence of free will, but I think like their critique is like in this specific scenario, if God specifically says something's going to happen, like does it have like is this person stripped of their free will by this
Ah,
prediction?
I see. Yeah. So if the statement is made, are you toast? Like you can't avoid it. And yeah, and I think if I'm understanding your point, well, they have the ability to not do it. It's just that they are going to.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. It's that they will do it. They will. It's like the same thing we said earlier. They will make this decision, but it's still a decision that they're making, I guess. So,
Yeah, it maybe that raises some concerns about libertarian views about free will, but I think Christianity runs into problems with that in a more general sense anyway. I have heard of the whole like hardening of the Pharaoh's heart. I'm not quite sure what to make of that. That sounds a bit like God directly manipulating a person's motivations, which seems like it
well,
might undermine
and
free will,
that
but
can't exist with libertarian free will, and neither can us having a sin nature, which is like a pillar in Christian theology. Is this idea that we have a disposition towards sin? So like the odds are
Mhm.
stacked against us. Without God, I will always want sin or like choose sin on my own strength. So like I don't believe in libertarian free will. I'd probably be a compatibilist, like you're saying. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I'm not a
interesting.
compatibilist though.
Oh, you're not a compatibilist. What are you?
No.
What would you describe yourself as?
Yeah, sometimes I've seen people word it as a no free will either way position, but I just take a quietistic position, and what I mean by that is that I think once you get clear on the underlying terms and what they mean in a given conversational context, I think that the question tends to dissolve. In other words, I think it do we have free will, yes or no, is a kind of false dichotomy And it's not that there's a straightforward third option. It's more that once you get clear on what you're talking about, that question sort of just stops being motivated. It stops being the sort of question that you think there is any sense in answering.
How so? Yeah, can you flesh that out?
Yeah. So this is kind of what I alluded to when I started by saying, do we make choices? Well, depends what you mean by choice. If by choice you mean the ability to select one option from a range of options, I think it's trivially true that people have that ability. Does it mean the ability to choose one option or another option in a way that is unconstrained by the laws of physics? Well, then no, I don't think we have that ability. So as long as you are specific on what question you're asking, I think that the questions become more tractable, and that free will appears to be this intractable, interminable dispute that's persisted for thousands and thousands of years. Well, maybe not thousands, a few thousand years, maybe longer. I don't know what people were talking
Yeah.
about 10,000 years ago. Anyway, uh, I think that the dispute persists in large part due to people not being clear about the language and concepts in play. And when you get clear on the language and concepts in play, you'll generally find that people will converge on, if by this you mean free will, then sure, we have it. If by that you mean
Yeah.
free will, then no, we don't have it.
So you're saying most of the disagreement in this just comes from people not defining their terms, and they might be like just talking past each other.
Yep, that's what I'm saying. So I take a pretty Wittgensteinian view of this and of philosophy more generally.
What does that
That
mean?
what I think is that the majority of philosophical problems, not all of them necessarily, but the majority of philosophical problems are a result of people failing to appreciate how messy language is. I think it's all about,
Mm,
not all about, mostly about people just not being careful with their language and their concepts. And if we could just get clear in our language and concepts, most of the problems will resolve. Again, I don't think all of them. I do think that there are important questions to ask here. So, some kinds of important questions would be, how do we structure our society from an institutional policy and interpersonal perspective when it comes to people committing actions that we think are wrong? So a person commits, like we're still going to need to address this question. So one person, does bad things. They hurt other people, and we engage with them and find out what their motivations were, and they're just like, yeah, I like doing bad things. Ha 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 ha. Okay, well, I have like, and they're fully cognizant of what they're doing, and they're just sadistic and not very nice. Okay, and then you have another person, and we find out that they were coerced. Okay, well, I'm going to find that person less culpable for their actions. Or we find out that the person had a brain tumor that was pushing up against their amygdala or something, and it was making them more violent and aggressive. And when we remove it, their personality changes. Okay, well, what do we do with that person? Do we treat that person exactly the same way as the person that is lacks any remorse at all and is still saying, "Yeah, if you let me
right.
out, I'm going to be violent again." Ha ha ha. I would say no. I would treat those people very differently. So we still need standards and criteria for how we treat people. It's not like if you don't believe in free will, you think we have to let everybody out of prison and not hold anybody accountable for their actions or anything like that. So I still think that there are all these practical questions, and I wouldn't use the term free will to distinguish people that we should hold accountable versus people we shouldn't, because I think it is too much historical baggage. But something like practical accountability, like, sure, I think people have practical accountability. We should hold some people accountable for their actions, and we shouldn't hold other people accountable for their actions. So I think there's plenty of philosophical work to do here, but I think it's best to just detour around the question of free will.
Hmm. That's really insightful, man. I've never heard someone talk about I've never heard someone talk about it this way. So you give me a lot to think about. I wanted to ask you about, since you brought up morality,
Mm-hmm.
um, do you think there is such thing as a moral fact?
It depends what you mean by a moral fact. I don't think that there are objective or stance independent moral facts, but I certainly do think that there are facts that it would be reasonable to call moral.
There are facts that are reasonable to call moral. What do you mean by
Yeah.
that?
Well, like, people make moral judgments. Morality exists as, if nothing else, than a culturally constructed human phenomena, the same way like money and the game of chess exist. So I would say like chess facts exist. So there are facts about how you move a bishop in the game of chess. There's also going to be facts about like what a person's moral beliefs are. So those are a kind of moral fact. There's like, Alex thinks stealing is wrong. That's a fact. If we could find a person named Alex and they think stealing is wrong, boom, there you go. There's a
Yeah,
person that
but
thinks
but
stealing is wrong.
can somebody's moral convictions be like, I don't know what else words to use, like right or wrong or correct or incorrect? Like, are they mapping onto some sort of truth that's in reality, or is the only thing that we can say is true is the fact that they have this preference?
I wouldn't agree with the latter point, and I also probably wouldn't agree with the former. I think it's like neither of those.
Oh,
If you're gesturing towards objective morality, yeah, I don't think there's anything like that. But I also don't think that the only facts are descriptive facts about what people believe. There's also going to be certain kinds of relational facts. So there's going to be facts like if people had these sorts of moral standards rather than those sorts of moral standards, society would have less suffering in it. I think that's probably a fact.
yeah.
So if everybody was against random violence for fun, then you're going to have a society with less suffering than a society in which people do
But this
think
to
that.
me this seems like the chess analogy where it's like, well, yeah, if I take this move in chess, it'll objectively lead to me, having a better chance of winning, or like whatever my goal is. So it's like you can objectively say that certain moral standards or certain like behaviors that are encouraged lead to like a certain result in society, but that doesn't tell you whether that result or that goal is inherently like virtuous or good. Like in the same way that just winning chess is kind of like an amoral act, say it would be the same thing for like the thriving of a human species would just be amoral. It's just like there are certain things we can do that will objectively get us closer to that.
Right. Yeah. So I don't think that there are any facts about what people should do or shouldn't do or what's morally good or bad that
Yeah,
are true independent of those people's goals or standards. I don't think there's any facts like that.
interesting. Um, so would you say that like, I mean, I'm wondering if there was people that had a goal in society that you would like strongly disagree with, things that they would take towards that goal would still be good. So like if your goal is to like eradicate a certain group of people, well then what is good is whatever helps you meet that goal because there's no standard outside of that.
Yeah, so it's a question of what's meant by good in these contexts. If by good one means conducive to a particular goal, then it would be good relative to their goals, but it doesn't mean it's good relative to my goals. So if someone wants to steal my wallet and we're using the term good in a relativistic way to mean consistent with some standard or goal, then it would be good relative to their goals to steal my wallet, and it would be bad relative to my goals for them to do so. And the important point to emphasize here is even if I acknowledge that the term good functions in that way in a particular linguistic context, that does not mean that I think it's good for them to steal my wallet. There's only a sort of trivial sense in which it's good for them to steal my wallet is true. It's only one where it's understood to be indexed to that person's standards. So it could be really, really misleading to say if you're a relativist, then you have to think that if someone wants to do really bad things, that it's good for them to do those bad things, because in that case, it's leaving unspecified
Yeah,
what standard is
it's
being
it's
indexed.
not good for them, but it's good for them. Like is that basically what
Right.
you're saying?
It's good
Yeah,
according to them. And so
yeah.
I like to use the phrase good according to. Let me give you an
According to,
example to
yeah.
illustrate this ambiguity and how it
Okay.
emerges, because this is a big thing in my critique of the way that realists, and this includes professional philosophers, have historically handled moral relativism and anti realist accounts more generally. I think that they rely on rhetorical and linguistic tricks to make the anti realist positions look stupid and evil.
Mm,
So imagine we come across an alien species, and they are like they evolved from like a scavenger species, and so they really like eating garbage. They don't eat fresh food. They like put all their food in a big dump. They let it rot and spoil, and
like
then
in
they go and eat it.
Ratatouille.
I don't know if they do that in Ratatouille, but
Oh,
like
sorry, keep
uh,
going.
spoiled, rotting food, they love it. It's delicious for them. It's nutritious for them. Like fresh food isn't really very tasty to them. They like that. So it would be good relative to their physiology and taste preferences and everything to eat that kind of food. Now, um, if we said, hey, it's good, like them eating garbage is good, does that mean you think it's good to eat garbage?
Mm, no, it wouldn't.
Like, good for who? Like, it's not good for you to eat garbage. You don't think garbage is tasty.
Yeah, but
And so,
yeah, again, this is playing in the joints of like what you mean by good though. If because it seems like when you say good, you just mean helpful or useful or like conducive to flourishing. But when like a moral realist uses good, we're referring to something else as good. Like we're referring to like a moral standard, which I would say like the food you eat doesn't necessarily come into question when you're talking about like ethics and morality.
Sure, sure. But the point of the comparison is one to highlight the way that we use language. It's not really about saying that food and morality are similar in any other
Right,
respect.
right,
So I do think of morality in the same way. And it's again important to emphasize that if by good we mean good relative to a person's standards, then it's going to turn out to be trivially true that if a bad person wants to do a bad thing, and even there, like by bad, I mean bad relative to my or your standards, it's going to be good relative to their standards, but all that means is it's consistent with their standards. So, a bad person wants to do really, really bad things. And the anti-realist charge was saying, it's good for them to do these horrible, violent things. Well, what does that mean? It means it's consistent with the goals of a person that has the goal of doing like a violent thing to do a violent thing. It ends up being really, really trivial what it means to say what that person is doing is good.
right.
And yet, if you just remove all that background of like the technical philosophical context and you just say, well, if you're an anti-realist, then you think it's good for violent people to do violent things, like kick puppies or something horrible.
Yeah.
That's super duper misleading because it's making it sound like you, the anti-realist, approve of kicking puppies and are approving of animal violence, even if that's absolutely not true. And critics of anti-realists constantly use this, they exploit this ambiguity and lack of clarity to make it seem like the anti-realist has a ridiculous position, like they're not against hurting puppies or whatever, even when they're like, no, I'm very against hurting puppies. I'm just as against the realist. So, if you're an anti-realist, you could be equally opposed to bad actions as the realist does.
Well, I think my only critique would be like I don't understand where if what you're saying is true and morality comes down to like just our personal preferences, what authority or like what moral authority I would have to hold anybody else to my standard of morality.
Yeah, I don't think there is any such thing as like inherent or intrinsic or objective moral authority at all. So you wouldn't have
So it's just like a
like some.
pragmatic thing. Like if you want to be a part of our society, you play by our rules that we agree on and whatever. But there's not like there's no sense in me like holding you to my standard personally. Is that what you're saying?
Something like that. Yeah, I just don't think that there's any such thing as. So, like a lot of non naturalist moral realists will think that moral facts, one of their special properties is that they are authoritative. But if you're talking about a secular moral realist account, so there's moral facts out there, the facts are true. So there's facts like you shouldn't hurt people for fun, and that's objectively true, and it's authoritative. Authoritative, how? How does it have authority over me?
Authoritative as in like it creates an obligation.
Right. So, but let's say I have the obligation, and I go, okay, well, I don't care about complying with it. Now what?
Yeah, if there is no moral standard, then nothing. Like, right? This is like if this is where I think that, I think that like a theist would have a better explanation for like where this authority would come from, because like if you have an obligation, then this has to come from someone like obliging you, and like there has to be some sort of consequences for you not fulfilling this obligation. But I don't see where you would have any obligation to meet somebody else's subjective standard.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think that theism and like Christianity, for instance, doesn't really have a big problem with moral authority. So there is a God that being it says, here's what the moral facts are, and you better comply with them, and there's consequences if you don't. That totally makes sense to me. Authority to me is I can only make sense of it as something social. One has
Mm-hmm.
authority over someone else insofar as they can enforce their will on others. Now that doesn't like enforce will doesn't have to be tyrannical or brutal or whatever. Parents can have authority over children even when they're raising them, optimally. So that authority to me is interpersonal. It's social. It's interactive. I mean, maybe a machine could have authority over us and be very,
Yeah.
very callous. But if you can't enforce it, how is it authority? I don't even I don't even know what this. It's almost like the secular moral realist accounts. The authority is like metaphorical because
Yeah.
on the secular moral realist account, okay, let's say there's a moral fact and it creates an obligation and it gives me a reason. And I go, okay, well, I agree with you. I've listened to what the philosophers have to say. I agree I have the moral obligation. And I also don't care at all and I'm going to ignore it. What are the consequences? I think the consequences are absolutely nothing. There's no consequences. Whereas if there is a God that created you and says, hey, here's the rules. If you don't follow the rules, this is what's going to happen. Okay, now there's consequences. So the thing I would say on the flip side, though, is that creating consequences doesn't make it a stance independent moral fact. It doesn't get you moral realism. It
Right.
just gets you a type of practical morality. And when I say just, I should say it gets you a kind of practical morality. Good. I say it as a good thing. That's a meaningful kind of morality. So I
Yeah.
actually think theistic morality makes sense in a way that secular moral realist accounts don't. That doesn't mean I endorse those views.
Right. I know. Yeah.
It's just like the secular views to me. I actually think the secular views largely emerged recently out of secular philosophers just not having, like, they really want the kind of moral realism. And I shouldn't say moral realism. They really want the kind of moral system you get with Christianity. They can't get it, and so they have bent over backwards philosophically to try to justify having such a system anyway. And I just don't think they're very successful.
So something that's attractive to me about the Christian worldview is it actually answers this question that I have when I'm examining my own life, and I'm pretty sure everyone has this experience, at least that I've talked to, which is that we have our own ideas of what is morally good, or ideas of like what would be an ethical action to take, but when I look at my life, I rarely follow my own moral code. Like I do things that I know are wrong, and then I have guilt about them. And then things that I know I should do, I don't do. And then so I'm like wrestling with this inside of myself. It's like if this is like they used to call the moral law like the natural law. Like if we look at like laws that are within nature, like gravity, this is something that has to happen every time. But when we look at, like every time I drop a ball, it will fall to the ground. But when I talk about like moral laws within myself, I like can follow them, or I can't, I won't follow them. And this like creates a problem. And I think like the Christian worldview and its explanation of what sin is like this mapped onto my lived experience better than other ideas. Like I don't know like where this comes from. This like us not following our own moral codes. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a strange situation. It's one of the objections that I've raised against Christian views is it's not clear to me why God couldn't have made people without. So okay, let me put it. I'll try to put it in more simple terms. I think that God could have created people with no desire to sin or do bad things, and that wouldn't be any. I don't know if you want to bring it back to this. I don't think that would be any sort of threat to our free will. And so I don't see if free will is somehow necessary for goodness or for whatever. Um, I don't see why God couldn't have just made people not want to do bad things. So I find it quite strange that on the Christian worldview, you have this all good, all knowing, all powerful being, and then they chose to create beings that seem to be inevitably disposed towards doing bad things, and then they're held accountable for it, even though it's inevitable. That does strike me, whether you believe in free will or not, as a pretty weird state of affairs.
Well, there's two ways to answer this. The little bit of a cold-hearted way, I would say, or like a less emotionally satisfying way and this is like an argument that like if you were talking to a Baptist or someone who's like a reformist would say that um, that the reason why God gave it, like, if I'm going with this hypothesis, God gave us this like disposition towards sin that like inhibits our free will in some way, was actually because there was a greater good in God revealing His grace and mercy. That this like outweighs us being perfect people. That God was able to be merciful to us, and that seems very like emotionally unsatisfying. And I don't know if that's like the true answer. I don't know how you would determine what is like a greater good in that situation, but um, I would just say like the way I understand it is if like free will is just I am going to obey whatever strongest urge or desire I have at the moment, um, then this would be a problem. But if there is like an idea of free will that says I have like an agency or an actual choice regardless of what my like like I have this like function inside of me that allows me to make meaningful choices. I don't think that God could have tweaked our desires in a certain way that would prevent us from choosing sin. Like I think that if we truly have that capability of making choices, then sin is on the table.
Yeah, I'm not convinced of that. Like, why do we? So you think we have to be able to sin?
Yeah, like if free will is meaningful, then there has to be an ability to sin or to desire sin.
Why does there why does there have to be the ability to so sorry. When you say the ability to desire sin, what does that mean exactly?
Like it seems like if like what you're suggesting, if God were to stop people from desiring sin, this seems like it would be an intrusion of free will because he's like actually controlling our desires in our mind. So I don't know what it would mean for me to meaningfully have free will. The same way, like if I was, it would be like if I was under a spell or a potion that made me fall in love with somebody. I wouldn't call that real love because I'm engineered to do a certain thing rather than actually having the free choice to choose one way or another.
So I don't buy that because there's already a sort of outstanding question, which is where what causes us to have the desires we currently have anyway? Like,
What
why do you
causes
desire?
us to have
Yeah,
desires?
why do you have? I didn't choose my desires. Like, I prefer vanilla ice cream over chocolate. I prefer Coke over Pepsi. I can't just choose to think otherwise. Like the structure of my brain and the whole set of experiences that I've had in my childhood and like like
Mm,
if cilantro tastes bad to you because you have like a gene that makes it taste like soap, you didn't choose to have that gene. So our taste preferences are largely outside of our control. And yet I don't see that as any sort of constraint on my free will. Like, I would say I do have the free will to eat foods that I don't like if I'm going to use the word free will in a sort of a loose and acceptable way that's not overly constrained. Um, I like my example. I have the ability to go in my backyard and eat dirt. I don't do it because I don't want to, and I didn't choose to not have that kind of desire. So it doesn't seem to me like we lose our free will if our desires are changed, and it seems to me like broadly speaking, human desires were largely shaped by God in the first place.
why do you say that human desires were largely shaped by God in the first place?
Well, if we're supposing God created us, God created human physiology, He created our taste receptors, He created how our brain reacts to things. Like, it looks like on the Christian worldview, God made it the case that, like, sugar tastes good, that bacon tastes good, that chocolate tastes good
Yeah.
to most people under in most circumstances given their physiology. And then, like, dirt and like rusty nails and fingernail clippings, those don't taste good. Um,
So real quick, our attraction to things like sweets comes from a biological necessity or like a like it like helped our ancestors survive basically. It was like a reward system inside of them for certain foods. Like, would you agree with that?
yeah, I think so.
Okay, so like I would say that the you could eliminate the desire for sweets, but this might have a consequence to the development of like the human species in a way that would be unpreferable, right? So like it's like and in the same way, like you could eliminate the desire for sin, but this might have a consequence that would be worse for humans, all things considered.
It might be. I don't know what it would be though. So, when it
Well,
comes to the
yeah, go
elimination
ahead.
of sweets, nothing about the universe requires that we had to have specifically this particular biological system. We didn't need to have this particular metabolism. We didn't need to have, like, we could have been designed to operate on photosynthesis or to not require food or sustenance at all. God could have created a universe where there's just a caloric ether that permeates the universe. And so everything has enough energy all the time. Like, God could have just done anything. So that God chose for us to have the specific desires that we have,
Yeah.
and that would mean that God like chose for us to like eating sugar, to like eating chocolate, to like looking at the particular art we like looking at. It looks like our desires are already largely outside of our control and were
Yes,
specifically
like we
chosen
were
and
we
selected
were
by God.
fashioned this way, and then it would make sense that we could look to the one that Christians claim fashioned us this way, for like why we have these desires in the first place. I'm following you. I think that's, and maybe the first stance I gave you is like a stronger one. I'm still kind of working through this in my own mind. But like maybe it is that God, like, because I don't know if you know who Dean and Parker are, but they like one of their arguments that they make against Christianity is, what God is cruel for creating hunger within us. That he could have ended if he would have created us a different way where we didn't need food, like maybe we did have like photosynthesis or something, this would eliminate like starvation throughout the world, right? But like it could be that there's a greater good that comes out of us needing to like or having this dependence on God or having this dependence on the things that he gives us, that this like humbles us in a way, or like it creates a better relationship with our creator or something like that. In the same way that like him allowing for sin or creating us with a disposition for sin will like draw us to him as like a in a way that if we didn't sin, we would be autonomous and reject God or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So I am familiar with them. I do think that they make a good point, and I think hunger is a good example. So many cases of people being hungry, it's just not even remotely plausible that it helps draw those people closer to God. You have children born into poverty in remote locations where there's no missionaries or people doing the work to spread Christianity. They're hungry all the time, and then they 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 perish. They stop existing because they were too hungry and they didn't get enough food. I don't
Yeah.
see any respect in which that person's brought closer to
Well,
God.
if
That
you're,
just seems like a horrible,
yeah,
miserable situation.
if your scope of analysis is like if your set of data is the people that are starving, I agree this would seem cruel. But if you look at all of humanity for all of human history, if this was the decision that God had to make, not just the decision for children in Africa, but for all people, should I allow hunger to exist? I think that you can suppose there's at least one reason why God might create us with a dependence like this. Because there's a lot of people who are brought to God through food. Like through, this is like there's a great good in, like shelters and food pantries and things like this that wouldn't exist if we didn't have this hunger. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but to get if the idea is that, hey, look, hunger is a good thing because it sets up circumstances in which people have the opportunity to do like charitable or volunteer
Then I
work
have to say
to feed other
cancer is a
people.
good thing because it allows for chemotherapy.
Yeah, yeah, I was going to go that, but I was going to make a different point, which is that like just analogize this to a human doing something like this. So imagine there's a supervillain and they call themselves like Baby God. And Baby God is like, look, I was persuaded by this defense, this like Theodicy explaining the existence of evil and suffering, that it brings us closer to God. And then so Baby God goes around like destroying crops. So there's a place where they have plenty of food. They destroy crops and then they buy a bunch of food and then open up like a shelter to feed, like they open up a soup kitchen. So they get a bunch of people fired from their jobs and they're all homeless and starving. And then they open up a soup kitchen and like, I could feed you. They open up a homeless shelter. Like that person, I think, would be a monstrously terrible, awful, evil
Mm.
person. And so it's good when God does it, but it would be like obviously horrible, monstrous, and evil if a person did it. There's something weird about
Well,
that. It
well, real
looks to
quick,
me like, yeah.
a better way to think about this would be these people have nothing to begin with, and you can either give them their own crops or you can give them a food pantry. So you're not because God didn't take anything away from us that we had originally, right? And does that make sense?
It does, but I don't agree. So since God has complete control, God effectively is creating the conditions in the first place. So God is creating the conditions in which famine and tornadoes and blights are going to destroy your crops. So I think God is causing people to be hungry. Like literally everyone is caused to be
Well,
hungry by God.
so originally, no. If my worldview or if the Christian worldview is correct, then God did create a world where no one went hungry. He did create a world where everyone had everything that they needed and actually abundance. We had more than we needed, but we chose to leave the garden. Like we left that place of abundance and chose to create our own cities where we would, now fight for our own resources and battle over these things and their scarcity because of that.
Well, you use the term we there, but note that like I didn't choose that. And so when you use that term we, you're invoking a kind of collective action. But why am I responsible for what other people's decisions were? I'm not responsible for what like Adam and Eve decided to do. And
You're not
yet it looks like
responsible.
Christianity.
Yeah. You're not responsible, but you are living in the consequences of it, which is just a fact of reality that we live in the consequence of other people's decisions.
Yeah, that may be so, but then it's not the result of my free will. It's the result of someone else's free will. And that seems kind of messed up.
Yeah, it is messed up. It is messed up that they sinned and that we have to live with the consequence. I agree. This is a bad, and this is why God seeks to remedy it. Like the whole Bible is God remedying this problem.
Right, but God could remedy the problem effortlessly by simply putting us all back in the garden.
Yes, but I think that would be a worse solution.
Why would it be worse?
Well, you could say like if you think of it like a parent, if a parent provides everything for their kid and their kid leaves the house and then starts his own colony and now all of that person's children are now living with the consequence of having scarcity and everything when this rich parent is disconnected. The rich parent could kidnap all of these kids and force them to live with them, or they could have open arms and welcome the people back, anyone who wants to rejoin. And I think that the latter would be the more loving thing to do.
Yeah, but you have those, people that are in poverty, starving, that don't know about God, and they are just unalived. They're not given that opportunity.
I agree, and this is what puts the fire under the butt of Christians to fulfill the Great Commission to go reach those people and to help those people. This is like why Christ's teachings were to not just say you love somebody, but to actually clothe them and feed them. Like this fits within the Christian worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but it still seems like God created the problems and then is asking us to solve them, and then taking all the responsibility and all of the praise and none of the blame for it.
Well,
The whole thing just strikes me
yeah.
as weird.
I guess I would disagree that God created this problem. I would say the first humans created this problem, and we're living with their consequences.
Yeah, they created the problem in a way where, because often a causal chain is complex. So I can cause a person to cause someone else to cause someone else to do something. And so
Hmm.
God set up the conditions in which presumably he knew in advance that he created this people that were in a vulnerable position that would inevitably do something. And so, yeah, did they bring about their circumstances? Yes, but God created the conditions in which they brought their circumstances about. So, it think of like a movie like Saw. So like, Jigsaw kidnaps people and makes them do awful things. It would be pretty weird for Jigsaw to say, well, they made the decisions, it's their fault. Well, you set up the conditions, so you made them make those decisions. And
Well,
that's how I see God. God is like a cosmic jigsaw.
I'm sure you would have a much different view of Jigsaw, though, if one of the options was not to cut off their own hand, but to actually eat from the tree of life and have everything that they need. Like, you wouldn't say that this would be a cruel Jigsaw, right? But if their only options are evil and their only options are suffering, then yeah, that would be a maniac thing. I would say that would be an evil God.
Yeah, if a God was good though, then I still don't understand why God can't just fix it afterwards. I'm not sure the talk of like the parenting analogies actually work. I think they actually show, if anything, that God is like a pretty bad parent if you compare God to the way humans are. Like, parents wouldn't just let their children not have enough food, but God apparently does let his children not
But
have enough
I
food.
mean, if your child was an adult and they left the house and they refused your help, would you force it upon them?
Well, so, I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, one, maybe depending on exactly what the circumstances were. But two, in a lot of these circumstances, like the child that doesn't have enough food, I don't see that child refusing God's help.
Well, okay, yeah, maybe not the child, but I believe we have this thing this is like the way I see the story going is that God created us with everything, humankind rejected God and rejected his blessings, and then God took extraordinary measures to win back humans, to offer them a chance back to the garden. This is like the story of the Bible, and I see that as being extremely good. Like all God has done throughout this is offer ways back to redemption and offer like goodness for us. And it's still up to us whether or not we want to receive it, or if we want to be a part of it, right? And I know there are children who can't really make this decision, and I would say that those people are not guilty and they wouldn't be condemned. But like there are adults who, are very aware of God and are very aware of his existence and his, calling them back, but they refuse for whatever reason.
Yeah, one thing that happens when we have these discussions is that it becomes a kind of apologetics whack-a-mole, where if I press on one issue, another issue pops up, and if I press on that issue, then it just moves us back to the original issue. And at this
How
point,
can
I
I
would have to
how
bring.
yeah how can I better address your argument? Like which specific thing do you want me to hone in on?
Oh, well, that just to be clear, this is not an objection to what you're saying. I think this is a natural, it's like an organic progression in the conversation. So I'm not at all objecting to anything you're saying. What I'm saying is, um, if if I put pressure on one issue, it often makes sense to say, okay, well, that's not an issue because of this other thing. But then if I go and push on that issue, we can just sort of go in like a problem loop. And
I
it's
see.
hard to zoom out and look at the whole thing holistically. The
Yeah.
issue at this point would be, take my circumstances. I'm not starving. I am aware of Christianity. I'm very aware of Christianity, and yet I'm not a Christian. In fact, I used to consider myself a Christian, and I don't anymore. Now, I would call myself an ex-Christian. A lot of Christians don't like that. They'll say, once saved, always saved. If you're not saved now, you were never a
Right.
Christian. Whatever. I'm not going to get into disputing that. But it doesn't look to me like if the Christian God is real that they're taking extraordinary action. I've had no personal revelations or experiences with God. It doesn't look to me like I don't think I'm in a position where I've been given good reasons at all to think that the Christian God exists, that it cares about me, that it wants to have a relationship with me, that it's a good being. I don't think I have good reasons to think any of those things. And I also don't think that I'm like hostile or resistant towards the Christian God in a morally culpable way. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think that I am. And so if I'm held accountable for not believing, uh, it looks to me, it looks like I'm being held accountable for making a completely reasonable decision given the information available to me. That seems a little weird.
Well, two things on that. I think if your standard is like a personal revelation, I think you should assess your standard respectfully. Like I absolutely do think there has been a general, both a general revelation and like a revelation through God's word of this thing that I'm talking about, of God going through extraordinary measures. And I know that gets into the whole, like, can we actually trust the Bible, and is this like something that we should take as truth? But um, I think like you have what you need to reach God, and that's only because of the work that God has done. But in regards to your last point about why should I be condemned for something I don't for not believing in something when it seems very reasonable for me not to believe it? I don't think you were condemned for not believing in something. That's actually not why people are condemned. The reason that you would be condemned is the same reason I would be condemned, which is because we have sin in our lives, that we do things that we know we shouldn't do, and we don't do things that we know we should do. And this applies to every single person on the face of the earth. That's what separates us from God and separates us from perfection.
Yeah, I just to flag where I'm at with time. I have to go in about 15 minutes. I have
All
I have
good,
somewhere to
man.
be. So I guess what I would want to ask at this point, if we've got a bit more time, and I guess you'll be my only request today, so nobody else request because I'll just go when this conversation is over. It's probably about 10 minutes. Um, do you think I've been given? Because you mentioned something like I have enough of the resources, or I've been given reason to believe in God, like I have what I need.
Yeah.
What would you say that I have that should incline me towards belief in God?
Well, you've been given the ability to reason. You've been given a mind that can think critically. And you've also been given the Old and the New Testament, which is the story of God and the way he's interacted with mankind. So you have the faculties to understand sufficiently about God, and then you have the evidence to look into, I think, are like the two biggest things I would say that could lead you to God.
Sorry, it had some sort of pop up on my screen that was like checking if I'm still here. Can you go over that last point again? So I have
Yeah,
the faculties, and then what was the other thing you said?
you have the faculties and you have the evidence. So you can use your faculties to investigate the evidence.
So I think that I have done that, and then I concluded that God probably doesn't exist.
Um, Based on what?
Well, I mean that's a very long conversation to have in the next ten
Yeah, I
minutes,
know.
but uh,
Yeah, that's true.
there's just nothing about like there's no particular set of observations about what the world is like that make me think got to be a God, or God is a good explanation for this. So for me, it's largely about abductive inference. So all things considered, if I'm saying, okay, what do I think the best, most plausible model of what the world is like? It's one that's broadly an empirical. It's like I'm not like a naturalist in the philosophical sense because I don't know quite what that means, but it looks to me like there is a natural world as described by science, and there's not. I don't see any good reason to think there's anything much more than that. Like I just haven't been given good evidence. So I think that it would be largely a matter of like, okay, well, what is the supposed evidence? So
Yeah, I don't think the
we would have
question
to go like
is,
one by one, like through fine tuning and
yeah,
the moral argument and these sorts of things.
and the
So, some
cosmological
Christians will
argument
appeal
and
to,
all that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I understand from a Christian or an apologetics perspective, if I say, I don't find any of that convincing, I don't take that to be like, therefore, you should be an atheist or you shouldn't be a Christian because maybe you find it convincing. Maybe I've analyzed the arguments poorly. Maybe I don't understand a particular premise well enough. So all I'm reporting in that case is sort of my own epistemic standpoint. And I'm not saying that from my like, I'm not saying I think everyone should be an atheist because I'm not convinced by the arguments. But I'm not. I'm not convinced by the arguments I've encountered. You run into this problem where it's like, okay, well, have you examined the arguments thoroughly enough? I don't know. I mean, how thoroughly do I need to examine them? Do I
Well,
need
I
to get
would
like a
guess that
PhD in philosophy of
I was
religion?
gonna say,
You know?
my guess would be that you've examined them more than your typical lay person has. So I
Right,
wouldn't
more
go
than
that
most
route.
people.
Yeah. Um, yeah,
So, like,
I think that's a difficult question. I'm not convinced by something, and I can't control what I'm convinced by, essentially. So like, what's God doing? Because He knows what it would take to convince me. This is what a lot of people tell me.
right. And I would also say I'm not unconvincible, I don't think. Like it's possible that I couldn't be convinced and I would discover that I'm just incredibly stubborn, and maybe that's a problem. But it that's another thing that I'm not sure how much control I have over how stubborn I am. But I don't think that I am. So if I don't think personal revelation is necessary. It might be it could be sufficient. Like if I had a personal revelatory experience, maybe I believe in God. But I don't think that's the only way that people can get to believe in God. I think they might be able to get to believe in God through witnessing miracles or being convinced by arguments or
Hmm.
reflecting on the matter and thinking God is a good explanation for things. Like there's lots of ways people could come to believe
Yeah.
in God. None of those ways have worked for me. So I haven't had the revelatory experiences. I haven't witnessed any miracles. I have read and listened to what Christians have to say up to a point, and I used to find it convincing, and I don't anymore. So if I'm making any sort of like morally culpable mistakes, I don't know what they are, and I don't know how to fix it.
Hmm. Do you morally culpable mistakes? What do you
Yeah.
mean, like in
So,
your own life? Like what is
well,
this?
let
What
me.
do you mean?
What I mean is, look, some people you could present arguments for Christianity, and they're not convinced because they're bad at evaluating arguments. I presume God doesn't punish people for being stupid. That'd be weird.
Well, and yeah, and this would go back to um, according to Christ and according to the Christian tradition, we're not punished because of our lack of belief. We're not punished because of not being convinced.
Right. No, no, no. I understand that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think indirectly in a way you sort of are. So you have a person, they're born into the world. They're gonna go to hell or be condemned or have, maybe you don't believe in hell. It doesn't matter. You're not going to be with God if you don't accept
Mm-hmm.
Christ as your Lord and Savior, whatever the situation may be. Good things will happen if you do follow Christianity. Those good things will not happen if you don't. Okay, so now you have this person, and they're doing their best to get through the world. And a Christian comes along and says, "Boom, Christian apologetics. Here's a bunch of arguments." And let's say the person is just not very smart. They're not very thoughtful. They're not very reflective, and they just kind of brush off the arguments. Now they do so not because of any malicious intent or because they're not willing to believe what's true. They're just not good at evaluating arguments. They're just not
Yeah,
very smart.
this
It seems a little weird now because now the person is going to go to hell because they're stupid.
no,
That seems weird.
it's like so it's like if somebody is drowning and you throw them a life raft and maybe they're so oblivious that they can't see the life raft. The life raft existing is not what causes them to die. It is the water. Like it's not how bright and flashy the life raft is that has any like the reason why they're going to die is because of the water they're going to ingest that's going to go into their lungs. And that's kind of the way that I'm viewing this is like we are in this state, the Bible says that we are already condemned, like apart from God, because of our sin and because of the choices that we make. There's one way out. Some people are going to be oblivious, some people are going to be blinded, some people are going to reject it, some people are just not going to be convinced by it. But I think God's only obligation would be to like make it available for people.
Yeah, going on your analogy though, I would ask, how did we end up in the water? And it appears from the Christian worldview, God's the one that threw us in there. So if God throws
No,
us in the water and then throws us a life raft and we don't notice it because God set up conditions in which we wouldn't notice it,
yeah.
God
So
is condemning
the
us.
water is outside of the garden, and we jumped into the water ourselves. That
Yeah,
according,
so
yeah.
that's what I'm disputing, though. I didn't jump into the water. I'd like to be in the garden.
Well, every time that we sin, we jump in the water. Like that is what playing in the water is. Every time that you do something that you know is wrong, you're playing in the water.
On your view, though, am I not guaranteed to sin?
This goes back to our original discussion. I would say you will sin. You're not forced to sin, but you will because you want to.
It looks like I'm forced to sin because God made me in such a way that I'm forced to sin.
No, God made Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve made their children. Their children made their children, right? Your parents made you. So God
Yeah,
didn't
okay.
make you with this.
I think God did make me. If I make a robot and then that robot makes another robot that goes around with a knife and does bad things with it, I made the knife robot in a way, especially if I knew exactly what the original robot would do. So if I go around
Yeah.
making a if I go around making a weapon producing machine, and I know exactly what it is. So I make a machine and the machine makes weapons. And I go, I am going to make a machine. I am going to make a weapon making machine. I'm going to unleash it on the world and it's going to go around just dropping weapons everywhere. And then people start using the weapons and hurting each other. I'm responsible for that. That's my mess.
And
It seems like that's
this is
God
the
is like
problem.
analogous to that.
It's hard to make this analogy from robots to people though, because then you would have to say that if I create somebody and my kid creates somebody and my grandkid then goes off and murders people, I'm responsible because I set that chain of events into motion. That's the kind of responsibility you're putting on God.
That's exactly the kind of responsibility I'm putting on God. So for a human, typically in the case of humans, the reason I wouldn't hold a person responsible for creating a person who creates a person who creates a person who does a bad thing is because that person didn't intend to do so. They're not able to predict it. They're not in possession of, they're not omniscient. They're not omnipotent.
Oh, okay.
God has a special set of properties that makes him uniquely accountable in the way that we aren't.
Because he knew the way that this would all play out when he started.
Yeah, exactly. And not only did he know, he had the ability to stop it in advance, and he's perfectly good. So if he could stop it and he should stop it, he would
Well,
stop it. And yet he
well,
doesn't.
if
That seems like a
if
problem.
if he should, yes, if he should.
Right. So,
But if he had even one reason not to, then this is not a contradiction.
right. And
So
that's where you get
yeah,
your like skeptical theism and all that stuff.
yeah. So I know you have to go, but next time if we get a chance to talk again, I would love to hear your thoughts on some of the classic theist arguments for God's existence, because I know you've thought a lot about them. So
I have not thought a lot about them. I've thought a little bit about them a long time ago. So
okay.
if we talk about this again, it would be great if you like present the arguments to me and we could discuss them because
Yeah.
I'm not going to remember them off the top of my head.
I'll
Not
try
not
my
stuff
best
that I read
to
20
give it
years
to you in
ago.
a concise way, maybe with some premises and all that. So cool, man. You're a cool guy. You're really good faith, and I enjoyed talking to you. You're real smart. So I learned a lot in this conversation. Hopefully we can talk again soon.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. These are the kinds of conversations I'm hoping to have with people where they're like friendly and not not the kinds of debates that we talked about when we first started talking. Appreciate it a
Yeah.
lot.
All right. Have a good one, man.
All right, see you later. All right, everybody, that is going to be it. I got places to go and things to do, and I'm going to head out. That was just one conversation. I think it went like a whole hour. That was kind of cool. All right, everybody, I will see you all later. I'm sorry so much. I see 45 people in here. I'd love to keep talking, but I really do have something I got to do in 15 minutes, so I got to go get ready for that. All right, I will catch you all later. Take care.